Today's keynote speaker is Will Sarni. Will is, not only am I happy to say that Will is a member of the NIDIS Executive Council, but Will is also an internationally recognized thought leader on water strategy and innovation. Will has written numerous books and articles and continues to present on subjects such as the value of water, innovations in digital water technology, the circular economy, and the energy, food, water nexus. Will is the founder and general partner of the Colorado River Basin Fund, a private equity fund which seeks to invest in technologies addressing water scarcity and quality issues in the basin. So Will, thank you so much for being here today, for giving us some of your time, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Viva, thanks so much for the opportunity. Always enjoy being part of this and sharing perspectives. So I'm going to touch on, and actually do more than touch on, but give you some insights in terms of how the private sector views water as a business risk, how to mitigate the risk, and invest in technologies that address various aspects of water-related risks within the Colorado River Basin. So next slide, please. I'm going to start by talking about wicked problems, and wicked problems have a definition. This is some of the attributes of wicked problems, and I bring it up because framing water as a wicked problem is gaining a fair amount of traction in the private sector, in part because it ties directly into how do they address water from a business perspective, and also how it drives things like collective action, partnering with other stakeholders. And the two attributes that relate most directly to the private sector are the last two that are in bold. Wicked problems never really sit within the responsibility of any one organization. So when you think about, well, how do we solve water as a wicked problem, it really drives you to acknowledging that all stakeholder groups need to be engaged. And the last bullet, some wicked problems are characterized by chronic public policy failure. And that's not meant to be overly critical, but it's really to point out, well, how do we really address public policies that can help us solve water as a wicked problem, quantity, quality, and equitable access. Next slide. This is one of my favorite slides because it gets to, well, so what? What do we do? And we really need to be very mindful that every stakeholder category has unique characteristics that can be brought to bear to solve wicked problems, wicked water problems. And if you look at the upper left, you'll see that entrepreneurs have great speed and focus, but they don't really have size or scale. And at the other end, the public sector has size, scale, but is typically not quick and has sort of a broad remit in terms of how they engage on these issues. And everyone else sits somewhere in the middle. And this is meant to be illustrative. And what you'll find is that, for example, the private sector, depending on the industry sector or the particular company, they might be closer to the entrepreneurial side of this, or they might be closer to the public sector. And then we've got, NGOs, utilities, academic institutions, and investors that are, again, somewhere here. What we're doing with the Colorado River Basin Fund is focusing on the entrepreneurs, the private sector, and investors, but also engaging with NGOs and the public sector. So the levers that we pull are more towards the upper left as a way to solve some of these incredible challenges that we face. Next slide, please. So there's nothing like quoting yourself in a presentation, so I thought I would indulge, but this quote came out of a conversation I had with a good friend who works for WWF, and we were looking at, well, what are the business strategies for global growth? And if you look at really where global companies want to grow, it's mostly in water stress, water scarce regions. Well, how do you reconcile the two? And that really sort of gets to the heart of the issue, is that water as a resource is essential to corporate growth and license to operate, social license to operate. So putting a fine point on that when we talk to the private sector is critical and has led to them developing corporate water stewardship, water strategies to address the various aspects of water challenges. Next slide. So I think everyone's seen this image on the right, which is from the WRI Aqueduct tool. I bring it up because when we talk to companies, and if you look at their water stewardship strategies, they do recognize that it's a global issue, but fundamentally it's always local. So, you know, it's the watershed in which they operate, watersheds. It's where their supply chains are located. It's where their customers are located and their workforce. And companies think about water risk in three dimensions. Physical, which is, do I have enough water when and where I need it, of the right quality? Regulatory risk, you know, what are the regulations right now? What might they be going forward from both a treatment compliance perspective, but also allocation. And we're seeing allocation being more of a disruptive dimension with respect to corporate water stewardship and business growth. And reputational risk, which is, you know, how do stakeholders view how you're managing water? And in many places, it's their water. And anyone with a social media account can comment on how companies are managing water, and that has a lot of power. So this is how companies think about water risk, and this is how they quantify business value at risk. And if you can quantify business value at risk, you can more often than not get over the fact that water is inexpensive, if not nearly free, and get them to think about really the value of water versus the price or full cost. Next slide. And again, look at the risk dimensions, physical, regulatory, and reputational, across a company's entire value chain. So it's their supply chain, it's their operational footprint. In some cases, product use is really important. So if you are a company that makes shampoo and soap, you care about, well, is there enough water of the right quality for a consumer to use my product? And increasingly, this is becoming an important dimension of how companies think about their role in driving innovation, innovative solutions, and engaging with consumers on why water matters and how to solve quality and quantity issues. Next slide, please. Corporate water strategy, this has evolved over time. If you think about how companies view water stewardship and water strategy, there has really been this journey from viewing water as primarily a compliance issue. Potentially water efficiency has come into it, which is the lower left. And, that delivers some level of business value and some level of positive environmental and social impact for a company. But fundamentally, it's really focused on compliance, cost minimization, in some cases touches on corporate social responsibility reporting. And what has happened is that companies, really for the most part, have moved towards this middle category, water stewardship. And that was driven by risk quantification, which I touched on, social license to operate, so the ability for a company to continue to grow their business and operate with a limited, if no, business disruption. There's a little bit of innovation there, but it's pretty ad hoc. It's not really baked in as a strategy. And at the top, it translates to watershed action, stakeholder engagement, thinking about their value chain. And if you remember, I talked about wicked problems that really required engagement with other stakeholders. And you see a lot of that here in the water stewardship component here as companies engage through collective action within watersheds and across their value chain. The part of this maturity curve that I find to be most exciting and really having the most impact in terms of, again, business value and environmental and social impact is corporate water strategy, which builds on stewardship and compliance. It doesn't abandon the first two, but really takes it to a whole other level. And you see companies investing more in innovation, technology, new business models, new engagement in public policy, making direct investments, including things like ensuring that their water strategy has a social impact, driving equity in access to safe drinking water. Next slide, please. A few examples here, corporate water technology innovation. AB InBev 3 years ago started something called the 100+ Accelerator Program. This year, they have brought in Coca-Cola, Unilever, and Colgate-Palmolive. So think about the power of 4 multinationals that are focused on water, but also issues like climate change, sustainable agriculture, packaging, things like that. So they're really in the water strategy category here and leveraging not just their capital, but their skills, global reach, know-how to take water technology startups and get them to commercial scale. Next slide, please. Another interesting example is direct investment. Microsoft has $1 billion climate innovation fund, which includes water. They've also invested directly in impact investment platforms focused on water with a company called Ecolab. They've also leveraged their AI technology by giving grants to initiatives coming out of the academic world, nonprofits, through their AI for Earth program. So if you want to look at really some very, very creative actions taken by the private sector, Microsoft's a good example. Next slide, please. What's going on in the Colorado River Basin? We've been involved in all 3 of these. In October 2019, we led a workshop along with the Environmental Law Institute to look at digital water technologies that can be applied for the Colorado River Basin to solve scarcity, quality, and equity issues. We're working with a company called True Elements, which is who has aggregated publicly available water quality data in the US and has a series of AI solutions that can predict water quality over a period of time. So it's essentially a digital twin of the Colorado River Basin. And we launched the Colorado River Basin Fund just a few months ago that invests in water technologies that don't have to come from the basin. They can come from our global network to solve problems within the watershed, but also similar problems in other watersheds. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of what we're looking at in terms of challenges, technology categories, and examples. Again, based on what we believe the important levers are, we're mostly focused on digital water technology, so data acquisition and analytics, managing the demand side, but also giving us the ability, us being all the stakeholders, to understand water quantity and quality on a real-time basis, which definitely ties into issues like improving access to safe drinking water, and then also quantifying impact for the investors, the technology companies, and the end users. Next slide. A closing thought. This is my favorite quote. It's from a science fiction author. The future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. So if you really want to think about what solutions look like, expand your aperture. They are with startups, they're with private sector, NGOs, and they're global. So picking examples and bringing them into our world has a lot of value. So a parting thought, I think that's my last slide. Any questions, comments, want to engage on any particular topic, I am reachable. As Viva knows, I may not always be quickly responsive, but I do respond. And I'm passionate about water. So always happy to engage. I made you laugh. That's good, Viva.
Yeah. Will, this was fantastic as always. To hit on so many points that have been talked about throughout this last 4 days. Well, we're in our 4th day now. So I guess, we don't have a Q&A session for you as we discussed, but I will throw out one question. You've definitely shown the power of the private sector, and there's obviously plenty of private sector opportunities here to integrate with. Where do you see the federal government in this effort? Yeah, and do you have an example of something that shows that bringing the power of the private sector with the federal government?
I believe there's an enormous opportunity to connect these two stakeholder groups. And the challenge is that we sort of live in different worlds, myself included. So creating a platform to bring US multinationals to engage with the federal government and all the agencies that have a wealth of information, but the private sector sometimes doesn't know how to access it, doesn't know the right door to go through. So, Viva is an action item. I suggest if we can create a place where they can come together and have, fairly candid discussions about, well, this is what we're doing. These are the challenges we're seeing. These are the data sets that we have that we can leverage. A number of the digital tech companies that were highlighted that we're working with multinationals, NASA is a wealth of information that everybody should be using more of. So, right. I just use NASA as an example, but there's enormous potential.
Okay. And I guess I was going to make this comment at my closing, and I'll restate it at the closing, but I think what we've got here is the potential seed for a follow-up to this forum to actually bring together those private interests with the federal government. And I know my federal partners that are on the forum right now would be chomping at the bit to have this conversation with the private sector.
So Viva, count me in. Let me know how I can help because we're seeing a real appetite for that in the private sector.
Fantastic. All right, good. Well, Will, thank you.